The capture. The small human colony on the remote planet of Lyra 7 had always been a place of peace. The settlers, mostly engineers and scientists, had come to this corner of the galaxy with hopes of building something special. They had little interaction with the outside world, and the dangers of space seemed far away. Their lives were simple, focused on research and development. But that peace was about to shatter in the worst possible way. The day began like any other. Sunlight streamed through the dome-shaped buildings, and the workers were already in the fields, conducting experiments and studying the alien flora of the planet. Alex Carter, a mechanic by trade, was working on his ship's engine, making adjustments to improve fuel efficiency. His hands were covered in grease, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't know it yet, but his world was about to change forever. Without warning, a dark shadow fell over the colony. The sky above turned a deep purple as a massive ship, much larger than anything the humans had ever seen, descended from the heavens. The Sorthar, a brutal and technologically advanced alien race, had arrived. The first few moments of the invasion were chaotic. Panic spread through the settlement as alarms blared across the colony. The Sorthar ship hovered above, blocking out the sun with its vast size. Dozens of smaller crafts deployed, releasing heavily armored soldiers who descended quickly to the surface. The humans had no defense against them. The Sorthar's weapons were advanced beyond anything the settlers had imagined. Energy blasts tore through buildings, sending debris flying in every direction. Alex barely had time to react. He heard the explosions and saw the smoke rising into the air, but by the time he reached for his communicator to warn the others, it was too late. The Sorthar were already on the ground. The invaders moved with precision, their battle armor glinting in the dim light as they stormed through the colony. Their leader, a towering figure in dark silver armor, barked commands in a guttural alien language. His soldiers moved quickly, rounding up the humans and taking them into custody. No one was spared. Alex, seeing the destruction unfolding around him, made the decision to flee. He sprinted for cover, ducking behind a pile of wreckage. His mind raced. Should he hide? Should he try to fight back? He didn't know what the Sorthar wanted, but he knew one thing. If they took him, it would mean the end. His heart pounded in his chest as he glanced around, searching for a way out. Then he spotted a small ship in the distance, one that wasn't too far from the wreckage. It was an old model, but it would do. He ran for it, praying that he could make it before the invaders saw him. Just as he reached the ship, he heard footsteps behind him. The sound of heavy boots crunching on the dirt sent a chill down his spine. Alex didn't turn around. Instead, he ran faster, pushing the ship's hatch open and jumping inside. The engine roared to life as he engaged the thrusters, sending the ship soaring into the sky. But just as he thought he was free, a bright flash of light erupted from behind him. The force of the blast shook his ship violently. The controls went haywire, and Alex struggled to regain control. His hands trembled as he fought to stabilize the ship. But no matter what he did, the craft continued to spin out of control, heading toward the Sorthar ship above. He had no choice. He could either crash on the surface or risk being captured. In a split second, he made the decision. He aimed his ship toward the massive vessel and engaged the thrusters at full speed, hoping to make it on board. The ship shuddered as it collided with the Sorthar vessel, its hull scraping against the alien ship's outer surface. Alex was thrown forward, slamming into the control panel as the ship's systems powered down. Everything went black. When Alex regained consciousness, he found himself lying in a cold, metallic cell. His head throbbed with pain, and his vision was blurry. He could hear voices outside, alien voices, speaking in a language he didn't understand. Slowly, he pushed himself to his feet, his body aching from the crash. He looked around the cell. It was small, featureless, and completely sealed off. The walls were smooth and metallic, with no windows. There was a single door, guarded by two massive alien soldiers, their eyes glowing a menacing red. Alex's mind raced as he tried to make sense of his situation. He was on their ship. The Sorthar had captured him. But why? He had no idea what they wanted with him. But he knew that humans were never taken alive by the Sorthar without a reason. This wasn't some random act of aggression. There was a purpose behind it. As he lay there, trying to formulate a plan, the door to his cell opened. One of the soldiers stepped inside, its form towering over him. It spoke in its harsh, guttural language, pointing to Alex as if it understood that he was not just another prisoner. This was no ordinary human. Alex didn't flinch. He stood tall, even in the face of this overwhelming alien presence. He wasn't going to be intimidated. He had survived wars before, and he would survive this. But as the soldier turned and left the room, Alex's thoughts turned dark. He didn't know what the Sorthar were planning, but he could feel it in the air. Something dangerous was coming, something that would change the course of his life and the fate of humanity forever. The capture had only just begun, but the real fight was about to start, and Alex was determined to make sure the Sorthar would regret ever taking him prisoner. The silent intrigue. Alex woke to the sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the metallic corridors of the alien ship. His head still throbbed from the crash, but the pain was fading, replaced by a cold, determined clarity. He was alive. That was the most important thing. But why? Why had they captured him? Why not just destroy him along with the colony? Was he part of some bigger plan? These questions kept swirling in his mind, but no answers came. The cell he was trapped in was as lifeless as the cold metal walls that surrounded him. Nothing but a simple cot, a small sink, and a harsh fluorescent light. Nothing to distract him from the pounding thoughts in his head. His hands were still bound, though not as tightly as before, and the dull throb of pain in his wrists reminded him that this was far from over. He wasn't free yet. The door to his cell slid open once again, and two alien guards stepped inside. Their armor was dark and imposing, making them look like something from a nightmare. They didn't speak, but the way they moved, efficient, calculated, made Alex realize that the Sorthar were not a race that made mistakes. They had captured him for a reason, and they would use him for something. One of the guards reached for him, and without thinking, Alex reacted instinctively. His training kicked in. He twisted out of the guard's grip, throwing an elbow into its side. The alien stumbled back, startled by the unexpected resistance. Alex didn't hesitate. With a swift movement, he used the distraction to break free from the other guard's hold. The two soldiers recoiled, surprised by the sudden outburst. They were fast, but Alex had fought tougher opponents before. He had been trained for this, training that had kept him alive in the harshest of environments. But before he could make another move, a sharp, cold voice echoed through the hallway. Enough. The voice wasn't human. It had an otherworldly quality, deep and menacing. Alex turned to see a figure approaching. The Sorthar leader, tall and imposing, stepped into the room. His armor gleamed under the harsh lights, and his eyes, yellow and cold, locked onto Alex with a chilling intensity. "Your resistance is pointless," the leader said, his voice vibrating through Alex's bones. The alien didn't raise his voice, but there was an undeniable authority in his tone that made Alex hesitate. "You will learn your place soon enough." The guard stepped back, forming a protective line around the leader. Alex stood there, silently studying the alien. There was something different about this one. He wasn't like the others. The Sorthar leader exuded power, a raw force of nature. But it wasn't just his strength that made Alex wary. It was the intelligence in his eyes. This alien was thinking, watching, calculating. Alex took a deep breath. He had to find a way out. He couldn't stay in this cell forever. The Sorthar wanted something from him, and he wasn't about to wait around like some helpless prisoner. The leader tilted his head slightly, observing Alex's defiant posture. "You're not like the others," he said, almost as if it was a statement of fact rather than a question. "Most humans break quickly. You have strength, but strength alone will not save you here." Alex didn't speak. He was determined not to show weakness. The last thing he wanted was to give this creature the satisfaction of seeing him break. The Sorthar leader seemed to sense this. He gave a sharp nod, and the guard stepped forward, reaching for Alex's arms once more. This time, Alex allowed them to take hold of him. He didn't want to waste his energy on futile resistance. Not yet. The leader's cold smile made Alex's skin crawl. "You will be valuable. I can already see that." With that, they dragged Alex out of the cell and down the long, sterile halls of the Sorthar ship. The journey felt endless, each step echoing with the haunting uncertainty of what was to come. But there was something else nagging at the back of Alex's mind, something he couldn't ignore. The Sorthar didn't take prisoners without reason, and from what he'd seen, they were not a race known for making mistakes. They were highly organized, and they didn't leave things to chance. Alex was not just any prisoner. There was something about him that had caught the attention of the Sorthar. He had a feeling it wasn't just because of his status as a human. No, they wanted something more. The question was, what? They reached a large, imposing chamber. The door slid open with a hiss, and Alex was shoved into the room. Inside, a large table was covered with maps and alien technology that Alex couldn't quite comprehend. The walls were lined with what appeared to be data storage units, each one humming with energy. At the center of the room stood a tall figure, dressed in dark robes that flowed like liquid shadows. This was the Sorthar scientist, Alex realized, the one responsible for the most important part of their operations. "Ah, the human," the scientist said, his voice smooth and unsettling. "The one they've captured." Alex held his ground, glaring at the alien. He didn't trust them, not for a second. But he had learned long ago to keep his thoughts to himself, especially in front of enemies. The scientist stepped closer, eyes glinting with curiosity. "Fascinating," he murmured, "a specimen unlike any we've encountered before." Alex's skin prickled. He had a feeling the real reason for his capture was about to be revealed. And whatever it was, he knew it wouldn't be good. "Prepare him," the scientist ordered the guards. "It's time to begin the experiment." The word experiment sent a shiver down Alex's spine. He had no idea what these aliens had planned for him. But one thing was certain, he had to find a way out. And soon, because if he didn't, whatever they were going to do would be the least of his worries. The true fight for his life had just begun. The experiment. Alex's mind raced as he was strapped into the cold, unyielding chair. The restraints were tight, each piece of metal digging into his skin as he struggled against them. His heartbeat echoed in his ears, loud and fast, like a war drum signaling the coming battle. He didn't know what kind of experiment the Sorthar were planning, but the look in their eyes told him one thing. They believed that whatever it was, it would give them the advantage they were seeking. The scientist, with his pale skin and calculating eyes, stepped forward and looked down at Alex with a strange expression. His lips curled into a thin smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. He seemed pleased by Alex's defiance. But there was something else, something cold beneath the surface. "You are a rare specimen," the scientist said, his voice oddly calm. "Humanity has long been known for its resilience, but we want to know what makes you different. You'll help us answer that question, one way or another." Alex's stomach twisted with dread. He didn't know what they wanted from him, but he knew one thing for sure. This was no ordinary interrogation. This was something worse. The scientist motioned to the guards, who began to power up strange-looking devices that hummed with energy. Alex's eyes flickered over the machines, trying to make sense of them. Some kind of scanning equipment, perhaps, but it looked like nothing he had ever seen before. "You won't break me," Alex said, his voice low but steady. "You'll regret underestimating humanity." The scientist didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply nodded, his hands moving with practiced precision, as he activated one of the machines. The humming noise grew louder, and Alex felt a strange tingling sensation begin to spread through his body, starting from his hands and working its way up his arms. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever felt before, cold, sharp, and yet burning with an unnatural intensity. His muscles tensed, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He wasn't sure if it was the machine or fear, but something told him that this experiment was far from ordinary. Resilience, the scientist said, his voice almost a whisper, as if the word itself held power. We will see just how resilient you are. The machine buzzed again, sending a pulse of energy through Alex's body. His vision blurred, and he clenched his fists against the pain. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but he gritted his teeth and refused to scream. The Sorthar were trying to break him, trying to find some weakness, some flaw they could exploit. But they didn't know humanity. They didn't understand what it meant to fight with everything you had, even when all seemed lost. As the machine continued to pulse, Alex's mind began to race. He couldn't let them break him. He couldn't let them win. He had to find a way to turn this around. His thoughts flashed to his crew back on Lyra 7. They would be looking for him. They would be searching for any sign, any trace of what had happened to him. He knew they were out there, still fighting, still hoping. That thought kept him anchored. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for them, for all of humanity. They couldn't afford to lose this war, not when it had only just begun. Suddenly, the tingling sensation in his body intensified, and Alex's teeth ground together. His vision swam, the edges of the room distorting. He wasn't sure how much more of this he could take, but he refused to let them see his weakness. But then, something shifted. Something deep within him responded to the machine. He didn't know why or how, but it was as if his body was rejecting the invasive energy. A surge of power flooded through his veins. He couldn't explain it, but suddenly he felt stronger, more alive, more focused. His heart hammered in his chest, but now it wasn't fear that fueled it. It was anger. Anger at the Sorthar for daring to treat him this way. Anger at the galaxy for underestimating humanity. And in that anger, something changed. He felt the connection to his surroundings, to the machines, to the ship itself. It was almost as if his mind had become one with the technology. The hum of the machine faltered for a brief moment. And in that moment, Alex seized his chance. He focused all his energy into his right hand, and with a sudden twist, he broke the restraint on his arm. The guard nearest to him flinched, clearly not expecting this sudden movement. Before they could react, Alex tore the second restraint off with a force that shocked even him. His body felt alive with energy, like every muscle was firing at once. He swung his legs forward and slammed them into the side of the machine, causing it to short-circuit with a loud crack. Sparks flew from the device, and the room was filled with the acrid smell of burning circuitry. The guards immediately moved toward him, but Alex was faster. He reached out and grabbed one of them by the throat, lifting the alien off the ground effortlessly. The guard's struggles were weak. Alex was filled with an unnatural strength, and he wasn't about to waste it. He threw the guard aside and turned toward the scientist. The Sorthar leader stood frozen in shock, his eyes wide with disbelief. Alex had broken free. He had turned their own technology against them. "Release me," Alex demanded, his voice cold and commanding. "Now." The scientist's lips quivered in fear, but he said nothing. It was clear that the Sorthar had underestimated the power of a single human. They had thought they could break him, but Alex had just begun to show them what humanity was truly capable of. The Sorthar were not the only ones with power. And now, Alex was going to make them understand that. The experiment had failed, and the true battle had just begun. As Alex stood tall, feeling the weight of his newfound power, he knew one thing for certain. The Sorthar would never forget the name of the human who had defied them. And it was only a matter of time before they learned the true cost of their arrogance. "You said, 'The reckoning,'" Alex moved with precision, his every step calculated as the room's tension grew thicker. The Sorthar had underestimated humanity, and now they would feel the consequences. He was no longer just a prisoner. The chains that once held him now felt like nothing more than a distant memory, a reminder of what the Sorthar had thought they could do. The guards were down, their bodies sprawled across the cold metal floor, unconscious or worse. The scientist stood frozen, staring at Alex with a mix of fear and disbelief. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the faint hum of the malfunctioning machinery. Alex's chest heaved, but his mind was sharp, every thought crystal clear. "I told you," Alex said, his voice cold and steady. "You made a mistake." The Sorthar scientist flinched, his pale skin a stark contrast to the growing unease in his eyes. You're not what we expected." His voice trembled slightly, the arrogance that had once defined him now replaced by something darker. Fear. Alex's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer. The Sorthar had built a reputation for their cold, calculating nature. They were ruthless, efficient, and yet here he was, a single human, turning their own weaponry and technology against them. "You thought you could break me," Alex continued, his voice cutting through the stillness. "You thought I was just a prisoner, a weak, helpless human who would bow to your will. But you were wrong." The scientist's face twisted, his hands trembling as he reached for the control panel on the wall. "You'll regret this." The Sorthar, "You have no idea what you've done." "Regret?" Alex scoffed. "I think it's you who will regret this." He stepped forward, his boots echoing on the metal floor, his voice rising. "The Sorthar may be powerful, but you're not invincible. And I'm not going down quietly." The scientist's hand hovered over the control panel, but Alex didn't give him the chance to activate whatever defensive measure the Sorthar had put in place. With a swift movement, Alex lunged, knocking the scientist to the ground. The alien's face contorted with panic as Alex held him in place, his grip tightening around the alien's neck. "What are you going to do?" The scientist choked, his eyes wide with fear. "You can't win this war alone." Alex leaned in closer, his eyes cold and determined. "I won't be alone for long." The word hung in the air, charged with meaning. Alex didn't need to say more. He knew that his actions, his resistance, would send a message that the Sorthar couldn't ignore. He would make them understand the true cost of crossing humanity. They would learn what it meant to face someone who would never give up, no matter the odds. The scientist, his breath shallow and labored, could barely speak. "You will fall, just like the others." Alex's grip loosened slightly, and he let the alien speak, though his patience was wearing thin. The Sorthar leader had lost his composure, something Alex had never expected to see. It gave him hope. "You're wrong," Alex said softly, releasing the scientist from his grasp. He took a step back, surveying the room. "Humanity doesn't fall. We fight." The scientist sputtered, still too dazed to offer any resistance. Alex stood over him, feeling a strange sense of control. In this moment, he realized that it wasn't just about escaping or surviving anymore. It was about something bigger. The Sorthar might have captured him, but they had no idea what kind of force they had unleashed. With one last glance at the scientist, Alex moved swiftly toward the door, taking careful note of the ship's layout. It was time to escape, time to find a way to bring this fight to the Sorthar. As he made his way through the corridors, he could hear the distant sounds of the Sorthar regrouping, preparing for whatever retaliation they had planned. But Alex was already thinking ahead, plotting his next move. He wasn't just going to survive this. He was going to bring the fight to them. The ship was massive, its design alien and complex. Yet, Alex's mind was sharp, his training kicking in as he made his way through the maze-like halls. He needed to find a way to send a signal, a distress call, a message that would reach beyond this ship, beyond the Sorthar. He needed to let the galaxy know that humanity was not to be underestimated. He reached an access panel in a quiet hallway, quickly hacking into the system. The controls were unfamiliar, but Alex was no stranger to alien technology. He had been trained for situations like this, trained to adapt, to think on his feet. The panel blinked to life, and Alex's fingers flew over the controls, overriding the ship's security systems. The Sorthar would be coming for him soon, but he couldn't wait. He needed this message to get out. He needed the galaxy to hear humanity's voice. As the signal went live, Alex leaned back against the wall, watching the flashing lights of the control panel. A faint smile tugged at his lips. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The Sorthar would know. And if they thought that capturing one human would break the will of an entire species, they were gravely mistaken. The tide of war was turning. The Sorthar had made a grave error, and now they were going to pay for it. With the signal sent, Alex moved forward again, determined to keep fighting. The Sorthar had no idea what kind of resistance they were about to face. Humanity wasn't just a species to be captured or contained. They were a force. And the Sorthar were about to learn that lesson the hard way. The unlikely alliance. Alex's heart pounded as he navigated the alien ship, moving silently through its dark, unfamiliar corridors. The alarms were silent for now, but the stillness was deafening. A quiet before the storm. The message had been sent. Humanity's voice had been heard. But Alex knew the battle wasn't over. If anything, it had only just begun. He needed to find a way off the ship, a way to reach his people. The Sorthar would be coming for him. And when they did, it wouldn't be just to capture him. It would be to destroy him. He had made his mark, and now he had to make his escape. As he turned a corner, a faint noise echoed through the hallway, a whisper of movement, almost imperceptible. Alex froze, his instincts sharp as ever. He wasn't alone. He crept forward, staying close to the walls, listening for any sign of the approaching danger. The Sorthar had set up patrols, no doubt searching for him, trying to regain control of their ship. But Alex wasn't easy prey. He had a plan, and it didn't involve being caught. Suddenly, a shadow shifted in front of him. Alex's hand instinctively reached for the weapon strapped to his side, but then he paused. The figure wasn't Sorthar. It was another human. Alex blinked, unsure for a moment whether he was seeing things. He'd been isolated in that cell for so long, it was hard to tell whether he was imagining things. But as the figure stepped into the dim light, it became clear, a fellow human. She was tall, her dark hair tied back into a tight ponytail, and her eyes were sharp with determination. Her uniform was the same as Alex's, military grade, with the insignia of the human forces stamped on her sleeve. She was a soldier, like him. "You're not alone," she said, her voice low but firm, as if she had expected him. "I'm Sergeant Riley. I'm here to help." Alex's mind raced. A human soldier on a Sorthar ship. This was no coincidence. But how had she gotten here? "I'm Alex," he replied cautiously. How did you find me?" Riley's eyes flickered with a mix of pride and exhaustion. "I was part of the rescue team. We were tracking the Sorthar's movements, but they got the jump on us. My team's dead, and I've been on my own since. I wasn't about to let them get away with this." Alex felt a surge of gratitude. He had assumed that his escape would be a solitary one, but now he had a teammate. The fight was far from over, but together, they had a chance. "The Sorthar won't be easy to take down," Alex said, glancing around to ensure they weren't being followed. "We need a plan, and we need to get off this ship." Riley nodded. "We can't fight them all, not head-on. But we don't have to. I've been scouting the ship for a while. I know where they're weakest, and more importantly, I know how we can use that against them." Alex raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" Riley motioned for him to follow her, leading him down a narrow corridor. "There's a hangar bay at the far end of the ship. It's mostly been left unguarded. The Sorthar are more focused on their power core and main weapon systems. We can use that. I've got a plan to sabotage their engines. That'll cripple them long enough for us to escape." Alex's mind raced, processing the information. Sabotaging the engines would be risky. Anything that messed with the ship's systems could trigger alarms. But if it worked, it would give them the perfect window to escape. "I like the sound of that," Alex said. "But how do we get there without being spotted?" Riley paused, her face hardening. "We're going to have to move fast. The Sorthar will be watching every corner. But I've learned a thing or two about staying out of sight. We'll use the ventilation shafts and the maintenance tunnels. We can avoid the patrols, get to the hangar bay undetected, and take them by surprise." Alex nodded, impressed by Riley's resourcefulness. They were up against a formidable enemy, but Riley's confidence and quick thinking made him believe they might have a shot at making it out alive. "Let's do it," Alex said, his voice steady. He wasn't going to let the Sorthar win. Not after everything he had already been through. Riley led the way, and Alex followed closely behind. The maintenance tunnels were dark, the air thick with the scent of oil and machinery. The walls felt oppressive, the tight spaces making every movement feel more vulnerable. But they pressed on, moving swiftly through the ship's veins, careful not to make a sound. As they moved deeper into the belly of the ship, Alex's thoughts returned to the message he had sent earlier. The galaxy had been warned. The Sorthar would not be able to hide behind their walls of invincibility any longer. They had a human problem now, and Alex knew that humanity's defiance would spread like wildfire. They weren't alone. Other humans were out there, fighting for their freedom, just as Alex was. The Sorthar had made their first mistake by capturing him, but their second mistake would be underestimating the strength of the human spirit. They reached the hangar bay door, and Alex's heart rate quickened. The moment of truth was approaching. They had one chance to escape, one chance to hit the Sorthar where it would hurt most. Riley nodded at Alex, signaling for him to get ready. They weren't just fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting for the future of humanity. With a deep breath, Alex pushed open the hangar bay door, and they stepped inside. The Sorthar wouldn't know what hit them, and neither would the galaxy. The sabotage. The hangar bay was eerily quiet, the metallic walls reflecting the dim light from flickering overhead panels. Alex and Sergeant Riley slipped into the shadows, careful not to make a sound. The hangar was vast, filled with alien technology that hummed with power. Ships of different sizes and shapes were lined up, their sleek alien designs almost glowing in the dark. "We don't have much time," Riley whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. "Once we start the sabotage, there's no turning back. The Sorthar will know we're here." Alex nodded. His nerves were on edge, but he had no intention of hesitating. The Sorthar had done too much damage already, and now it was time to strike back. They were about to hit them where it would hurt the most, their engines, their power core. If they succeeded, the ship would be crippled, leaving the Sorthar stranded and vulnerable. Riley led the way toward the far side of the hangar, where the ship's main power conduits were located. They had to disable the engines without triggering an alarm. One wrong move, and they'd be dead before they could reach the escape pods. "Stay low and stay quiet," Riley reminded him, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Alex followed her through the maze of alien machinery, his mind racing. The mission was clear: sabotage the engines, escape, and survive. It sounded simple enough, but he knew better than to assume anything when dealing with the Sorthar. Their technology was advanced, and their defenses were tight. They reached the power control panel. The hum of the engines was louder here, vibrating through the floor. Alex crouched next to the console, watching Riley as she quickly began hacking into the system. Her fingers moved with precision, inputting commands and overriding the Sorthar's security protocols. She worked fast, but Alex could see the strain on her face. They had to get it right, or everything would fall apart. "I'm in," Riley said after a tense moment, her voice low but steady. "Now we need to shut down the power flow to the engines. If we can overload the system, It'll trigger a chain reaction. Alex's heart skipped a beat. Overloading the system. That was risky. But there was no time to second-guess now. They were in too deep. Riley didn't hesitate. She typed in the final command, and a series of flashing lights filled the room. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the hangar. The power was starting to shut down. "Get ready," Riley warned. "This is going to trigger alarms. We need to move now." Before Alex could respond, the ground beneath them shook violently. The hangar doors slammed shut, and the sound of heavy footsteps filled the air. The Sorthar were coming. "Go," Riley shouted. Alex didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted toward the far end of the hangar, his feet pounding against the cold metal floor. The sound of alarms blared in the distance, and red warning lights flashed in every corner. The ship was in chaos. They reached the escape pods, but the doors were sealed. Riley cursed under her breath, her hands working frantically at the control panel. "Hurry," Alex urged, looking over his shoulder. The Sorthar would be on them any second. "I'm trying," Riley replied, her voice tight with stress. Come on, come on." With a hiss, the door to the escape pod slid open. Riley jumped inside first, followed by Alex. As the doors sealed shut behind them, the pod's engines roared to life, shaking with power. Riley punched in the coordinates, and within seconds, the pod launched into space, leaving the Sorthar ship behind. But the danger wasn't over. Alex looked out of the small porthole, watching as the massive Sorthar ship drifted in the distance. The ship was crippled, but it wasn't destroyed. The Sorthar would be coming for them soon, and they had no way of knowing how many ships were still in pursuit. "We did it," Alex said, a sense of disbelief in his voice. "We actually did it." Riley didn't answer at first. She was staring at the control panel, her eyes scanning the readings. She was calculating their next move. "The mission's not over," she said quietly. "We're just getting started." Alex glanced at her, realizing the gravity of what she was saying. This was only the beginning of their fight. The Sorthar wouldn't forget the damage they had done. But now, they had something they hadn't had before. A plan. A way to fight back. Alex leaned back in his seat, his body exhausted, but his resolve stronger than ever. They had sent a message. The galaxy had seen what they were capable of, and the Sorthar would learn the hard way that humanity couldn't be crushed. They weren't just survivors. They were warriors. And the Sorthar had just made a grave mistake by thinking otherwise. The journey ahead would be dangerous, but Alex knew one thing for sure. Humanity would never back down. The real war was about to begin. The reckoning. The escape pod drifted silently through the cold emptiness of space, its sleek metallic surface reflecting the dying light of the Sorthar ship in the distance. Inside, Alex and Sergeant Riley were seated in tense silence, both staring at the control panels, their minds racing. The ship had been crippled, but the Sorthar were not so easily defeated. They would regroup, send reinforcements, and hunt them down with a vengeance. But Riley had already proven she could outsmart them once, and Alex had learned enough in his time as their prisoner to know that they couldn't be underestimated. If they were going to survive, they had to keep moving, keep fighting. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about sending a message to the Sorthar and every other species that thought they could control humanity. Riley broke the silence first, her voice low but steady. "We can't stay here for long. The Sorthar will notice our escape soon, and they won't stop until they find us. But I have a plan." Alex turned toward her, leaning forward in his seat. "Tell me." Riley pressed a few buttons on the control panel, bringing up a star map. She traced a route with her finger. "There's a neutral system on the edge of Sorthar territory. We can lay low there for a while. It'll give us time to regroup and figure out our next move. But we'll have to move fast. Once we leave their sensor range, we can't afford to get caught again." Alex nodded. "And once we're there, what's next? What's the real plan?" She met his gaze with fierce determination. We're going to take the fight to them. It's time we show the Sorthar they messed with the wrong species. We'll start by spreading the word about what happened, what we've done. The galaxy needs to know they're not invincible. If we can rally enough people, we can make them regret ever crossing us. Alex's heart quickened at the thought. It wasn't just about survival anymore. They were going to take the fight to the heart of Sorthar power, and they weren't going to stop until every corner of the galaxy knew that humanity would not be crushed. We'll need allies, Alex said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. Other races, other factions who've been under Sorthar control. They'll want to join us. Riley nodded. Exactly. The galaxy is full of people who are tired of being oppressed, of being ruled by fear. The Sorthar have made enemies all across the stars. It's time we start making some alliances of our own. The thought of bringing together a galaxy-wide resistance filled Alex with hope. He had seen the strength of humanity, the unyielding spirit that refused to be broken. But now, it wasn't just humanity he was fighting for. It was everyone who had been oppressed, everyone who had suffered under the Sorthar's brutal reign. Let's do it, Alex said, his voice resolute. Let's show them what humans are capable of. Riley smiled, the corners of her lips curling upward as she typed in the coordinates. Brace yourself, Alex. The real battle is about to begin. The pod hummed as it adjusted its course, setting off toward the distant neutral system. Outside, the vast expanse of space stretched before them, quiet, cold, and infinite. But the calmness outside was nothing like the storm that was brewing inside Alex's chest. This was it. This was their moment. The Sorthar had underestimated them. They had made the mistake of thinking humanity was weak, thinking they could crush them like so many other species they had conquered. But they had no idea what they were up against. Alex glanced out the small porthole, his thoughts drifting back to the moment he'd first found himself trapped aboard that Sorthar ship. It seemed like a lifetime ago. He had been a prisoner, alone, helpless. Now he was a leader, a symbol of defiance. The galaxy was about to change. Humanity was going to rise, and the Sorthar would never forget the cost of their arrogance. As the escape pod continued its journey toward the neutral system, Alex and Riley shared a quiet moment of resolve. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for certain. They weren't going to stop fighting. The war had just begun, and humanity was ready. They would not be silenced.